Well, hey there, Internet. So I got a request from somebody from the series that I did prior to this, which was Material UI. It was kind of a full walkthrough of Material UI in a React app. So the request that I got was to do some state management with the chips inside of Material UI. So these are the delete features, and I'll be going through all of that and kind of pointing them out here, but I just kind of want to set you up for what we're doing. So we're going to be handling like hover for these chips, and this hover is going to be used on the chips, but it could be used for any piece in Material UI. Like you can add any kind of hover or focus, any kind of pseudo selector state that you have the possibility to add with CSS. So we're going to go through some of that. First off, let's kick off the project. Now, if you remember, maybe you don't remember, the stack that we're working in it's a React application with a Node server running Express, and it's communicating with some persistent data on a Postgres database. So I've got all of that there, and none of it's running right now, so I'm going to run all of that. The only thing that you will have seen that's a little bit different from the first time you ran through the videos, and if you don't know the videos that I'm talking about, they'll be linked down below in the description, so you can go check those out if you want, if you're interested in Material UI or React and just kind of like design style systems. So here, what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of kick things off. I've upgraded some of the dependencies since the videos came out. Some things have been upgraded. React has been upgraded. So I've got some of that in here. But I've already done the npm install because you don't want to wait through an npm install here. But we need to run the project. So we need to run both the server side and the client side. So to kick off our server side application, we're going to run npm run server. And that's going to go ahead and kick off our server application. And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of zoom in a little bit here for the video. Sometimes it can be a little bit smaller when it's screen captured. And then I'm going to open up a new terminal here, and I'm going to do the same process, but it's going to be npm run client this time, and that's going to run the client-side code. Now, because it's built off of create React app, it's going to like automatically try and kick us over to our browser. Yeah, so like it bounced us back and forth there. Like this is the browser with our application. It will be, yeah, you can see it's starting to like refresh, and hey, the application's coming up. Here's all of our little fantastic creatures and our little bestiary. So this is the application that we built the last time. Now, obviously, like, you know, we didn't spend a lot of time like going too overboard with like over designing this. This is really to like take a look at like how we change design systems, you know, and how we interact with them, specifically in this case Material UI. But know that like the documentation in that is fairly similar on them. But what we're going to take a look at here is these chips. I sometimes refer to them as pills because they look like a little pill. So you're going to hear these terms kind of tossed around depending on what library you're working with. But if we go over to edit, there's a little hover, right, on each of these chips. And then when we want to delete it. So how do we like actually like customize this hover? Because that's not something that we talked about previously. So we're going to talk about how we customize that hover event, and then we'll kind of go over that. All right, so let's start out with just kind of taking a look at the dry concept that I was talking about. So over here in source, if we open up, there's a couple of areas that those components are in. Now, if you weren't sure like where the component is, I'm gonna obviously like walk you through it, but I'll show you a quick thing. Command Shift F, if you're on a Mac, is going to give you a global search, and you can put in the term chip. Now I've got all lowercase, it's going to give me every match. If you hit this right over here, it's going to make it case sensitive, and if you do capital C chip, we'll see the actual components that have been used. And you can see that like I've got it in two different modules. So we're going to open up both of these components, the creature attributes and the creature habitats, just to see what they are. Now, in the global search here, I can click on it, brings the file open right over here, but I'm going to just kind of navigate to it over here. I just kind of wanted to show you the global search. So creature attributes, and then creature habitats. So I will tackle showing you how the hover styles get updated and changed here for our individual chip. So let's go ahead and take a look at that style portion first. So we've got some props coming in here. These are the required props for chip that we looked at previously. Now we've got the page open over here. I'm going to pop open material. Now obviously it comes up in my search history, taking me over here to icons right away. But what we really want to do is we want to look for chip. So right now I've got component API open. Components is where all like the demo stuff is. Component API is going to have all of the components, not kind of sectioned off. But the nice part about the component API is that they're all just in alphabetical order, so it's a lot easier to find things. Of course, they have a search too, so very easy to find things with search. But I'm going to click on chip here, bring us over to the actual chip API. And then we can use this because we can see that, you know, the props that are available, we got the color that we're setting. We also have the label right here. So that's, if we look, where's their label? Here's their label, right? So this is just like a text node that comes in. So this is just stuff to make chip work, right? And we've got certain things that are changing the overall color. We could change chip like globally. Chip's got, you know, its little delete editable piece in here as well, which is this on delete, right? We have an object here, then we add a property of on delete. That's what creates that delete button. And we're gonna have to kind of dig in a little bit to see where we put the hover. But hover in general is kind of straightforward. It's not like super straightforward, but it's pretty straightforward once you get used to like how they're doing it, because you can use any kind of CSS pseudo selector. So this is like hover or before, after, or you might see something like focus state on there. So all those things are pseudo selectors in CSS, and we can use any one of them on our actual custom CSS. So before, we would have had to take our design and we needed to get this color on our design, right? Like we totally did this by making sure that we like had the right colors in place and everything, and we overwrote like major pieces in Material UI at our app level for like how actual components are working. What I mean by this is we created overrides for their existing styles and overwrote them with styles that we wanted, like for MUI card header, just different pieces in there, right? And MUI button, right? We have all those things that have like their big overrides. Now, we did see some of the hover state get changed with the button. So this is what we're talking about here. It's hover here. We just have to change it for the chip now, which means we have to drill down into what the chip's customization is. So for the chip's customization, we're going to have to take a look at their documentation and see what we're looking at. Now, one of the ways that I like to dig into these first is I like to right-click and inspect to bring up what's going on here in the DOM. So specifically, when you bring up this elements inspector in the Chrome DevTools, it's super nice. I mean, anytime you're checking out anything, figure out what's going on, you're going to see like you've got MUI grid here, you've got MUI chip, right? So we know chip's happening here. It's got the root here. We've got the color secondary on here. We've got the deletable color secondary. We've got MUI chip deleteable. So you've got all of these things in here that are affecting this, right? Like they add a little bit of something. Now, the actual icon already has a hover to it, right? So the MUI SVG icon root, MUI chip delete icon, MUI chip delete icon color secondary. right? So it's got all of these little pieces, but we need to overwrite some of those pieces in order to get it to do what we want it to do. So in this particular case, it's hovering, and it has this nice little like light white color to it. Maybe what we want though is to change it, let's say, to like the orange color that's on the interactive buttons, right? So like when you hover over it, it's gonna go ahead and change to that, right? So we can absolutely do that. We'll take a look at what that takes. We'll also take a look at some of the general documentation here. So what we know we have to affect is the MUI chip base. So if we come over here to the API documentation, now we were looking at the general props that need to be on our chip in order for the chip to just work and have the different things that it needs to have. So for instance, if I go ahead over to my code and we come over to the attributes chip, and let's just comment out the color right now. We'll save this and we'll see what happens to our page. So here on our page, when we come back over here, right, this is the light version. It's not the secondary version, which is the dark version. So we want it to be the secondary dark version, right, because that's how we kind of set up our secondary colors. We thought that this didn't look quite right. So let's go ahead and put that back on. But this is important because we know that we're in the secondary color mode, right? Now, there are some overrides here that are saying that secondary is going to be something specific. But the important thing is that when we inspect one of these, we see that this delete icon color secondary is on here when the secondary style is there for the prop. If secondary color is not there for the prop and we inspect the thing, we're going to notice that it's just delete icon. It doesn't have the secondary color on it. So this is an important thing to note. Now, when we come down to our just past props, so we're again in the API section of a component for Material UI, right? If you look at the top, like it says, oh, hey, import it like this or like this, and then you can work with the props, right? And it seems all very analytical, which it is. You know, it's just very document heavy. But the important part is I want to customize styles. So I come down here to CSS. Now you're going to see some of these classes that might look familiar, right? MUI, chip, color, secondary. Now, I want you to pay attention to two things. First thing is the base class that's being used here is the overall component, MUI chip. And then they've got the second part that actually is the piece that it's affecting. So like MUI chip root is affecting like the whole thing. MUI chip dash color secondary, this is only on there when that color secondary prop is passed to it. So we're going to get the same thing for our delete icons. Right, so these are our deletable settings. So we've got a deletable color primary, we've got a deletable color secondary, and we want to affect maybe the hover state of the secondary. Now we want to do it for chips globally. So let's go ahead and do it like over in app.js to do it for chips globally. Now we could absolutely do it for chips at like a very specific level. Maybe we're using chips someplace else and we don't want this hover to be there. We just want it in this area. But this is the only place that we're using chips. So we're going to go ahead and do that in the app level here. And then we'll go ahead and jump over it and we'll do some other interesting things. So let's go ahead, keep our page open here, and we'll comment back in our secondary color. Save that, and then what we're going to do is jump over to app.js. Because remember over here, we don't have to worry about any of this because we're going to be affecting chips at like a global level. So every chip ever created with that specific secondary on it is going to get changed. So if we look at the pattern that we had in before, we have our base class, so like MUI card, but in our case it's MUI chip, right, from our documentation. So we're going to go ahead and put an MUI chip in here. And just like everything, it's MUI chip or MUI whatever, and then an object. inside this object, the first level of properties. So when I say first level of properties, that's this first key value pair in the property, right? So this first level going no deeper than here. This is, if we go back over to our documentation, this dash and then name. So it's whatever this part of our CSS is. Now specifically, we're wanting to affect the deletable color secondary. So I'm going to copy this, we're going to come back over, and that's going to become my key value for my property. So that's my key. And for the value, we're going to open up another object. So this object literal is important because we need an object literal to hold all of the styles that we need. Now we needed it to affect the hover state. So what we're going to do is for the key value, we're going to open up a string and we're going to put ampersand :hover. Right? This is where we use our pseudo selector. Now this ampersand, this is kind of a CSS precompiler thing. What this is doing is it's saying, hey, join this :hover to the selectors that's being created here. In this particular case, the selector that's being created is actually this .mui chip dash deletable color secondary. So that's what's being created, and basically what you're going to have here is that when this is created finally, I'll just create a little comment here. So when this is finally created, it's going to be MUI chip dash deletable color secondary. Right, that's the base class, and then it's saying ampersand, so add this to, so it's going to be :hover. And then we add our properties. So now in here we open up another object. You can see how this starts to nest pretty deeply, right? So we need to be paying attention to what we're doing here. But for the hover, now we can write in our CSS properties just like we did with any other one of these. So in this particular case, I want to affect the background color. So I'm going to put background color. Now, typically when you're in CSS, right, and we went over this in some of the other videos, but for those of you that might be watching this for the first time, you usually have background color with background dash color. So any kind of CSS property that has a dash in it for Material UI, in order to have it as an object property key, all you're going to do is remove the dash and then capitalize the following letter. So it'll be capital C color. Now for the color, we want to use our orange color that we had above. So luckily I still have them all here, so we're going to use this nice little amber color down there. Open up a string and put my pound, and there we go. All right, so this is going to be the color on hover. Now I've saved this, so we should be able to see some sort of change back in our application when we go to hover on it. All right, so what do we notice that's happening here, right? We notice that the whole thing is getting a hover color, right? It's not just a delete icon. We were hoping that just the delete icon would get a hover color. So let's dig back in, right? So you're always going to try it out, and then something may or may not work, right? Maybe it works on the first shot. Maybe it doesn't work on the first shot. So what we're going to look at is, how do I debug this? So what we have to do is look at our actual setup. So if we look a little bit closer, remember I thought, oh yeah, deletable color secondary, but deletable color secondary class is on the entire wrapping element. What we actually want is what's on this SVG element here. That's the actual icon, because you can see delete icon color secondary. So now, because we know the structure, MUI chip dash, and then this is going to be a property, right? So this is going to be a key, just like this is. So without even going back to the documentation, I should reasonably be able to say, okay, well, this should be deletable icon chip secondary. And then if I save this, hopefully we get the right thing, right? So let's save, and we come over here. Oh, it's still white. Why is it still white? So if you inspect this, The reason it's still white is because this is an SVG. SVGs don't actually have background color. They're a vector-based object that's just sort of being rendered on the fly. That's why they're so cool, because you can scale them to whatever size you want. But the best part about the SVG is you can also dynamically change the color with CSS. Unfortunately, it's not the same background color property that we're used to with everything else. It's actually a different property called fill. So now if we come back over here, our page is all refreshed. We should be able to hover over. Oh, no, it's not working, right? This is exactly what I'm talking about. We want to make sure that what we're doing here is working. And you might be like, okay, well, I can't see the hover styles. Well, of course we can't see the hover styles. The reason that we can't see the hover styles is because it's not in a hover state. I'd have to hover on this thing like while watching the styles, right? But how can we do that without like having to like hover the thing? So the way that we do this is we right click on the element and then we go to this selection that says force state. You can force it into any one of these states, and the one that we're wanting is hover. So it's going to make that hover just consistently without you actually having to hover over it. You can see that it's white while the other ones are grayed out without me actually hovering over it. And over here, we can see the styling. So we can see that it's actually coloring it with color. So what it's doing is this is an interesting thing about SVGs. SVGs will inherit font color. So in this case, they're allowing it to inherit font color, not giving you the fill property to use. So we actually have to use the color property. This is why we actually had to inspect it to see what was going on, right? Because they don't actually document that piece of it. We have to like dig into what's happening here to figure that out. So we're gonna pop back over and we're going to change this to color. And then once we've saved that, we come back over here, page will refresh. Now you'll notice when the page refreshes, it's not still forcing the hover state on this one item. So any kind of state that we're forcing, it doesn't keep it. It just, as soon as the page refreshes, it's gone. So let's hover. Okay, we've still got white, right? So let's inspect, see what's going on, right? That's the whole point. Inspect, see what's going on. So let's force state again to hover. And we can see the white. We don't see our color though coming in anywhere, right? If we start scrolling down here, we don't see our color. So we're going to have to figure out, okay, well, if we're not seeing our color, why is our color not coming across? Because we've got MUI chip, delete icon color secondary, right? That's the class that's being used, and that has the hover. So why is our hover not working? So let's go ahead and dig into that and find out why our hover is not working. Now, please feel free, like I said, I'm changing this as like a global chip level. If you want to try something else out, if you want to try and force the hover specifically on the element itself, you don't want to do the global. The main thing looks the same, like our little ampersand colon hover. That part looks the same. But what looks a little bit different is the classes. So you might have already seen where I made my mistake, which if you have, outstanding, great, you're way ahead. But this is the same thing that's going to like run across anybody. What I did was I was like, oh yeah, the deletable color secondary. Oh, and this is delete icon color secondary. And I just added the word icon. But this is deletable color, and this one is delete, not deletable. So I forgot to change deleteable over to delete. 9 times out of 10, it's always like a spelling mistake or a simple typo on something. So that's why you have to be super cautious about like, oh, okay, maybe I've been looking at this thing for like an hour, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what's going wrong? But all you really have to do is just let yourself step away. Like don't keep beating your head against the computer. Like just step away. When you come back, you'll have a cleaner set of eyes. Or if you've got a roommate or something, like talk them through what's going on, and then you might see it because you're looking at it more objectively. Let's come back over here, we'll hover. Hey, we've got our little hover. And it's changed the hover for every chip. Now we could absolutely leave it at that. We don't have to consolidate any of this. As a matter of fact, I'll open up another terminal and I'll commit this. All right, so that's it for hover. That's all we needed for the state, is we needed to track down what class was getting affected, right? And we found that the deletable secondary was actually on the wrapper, and that this delete icon secondary was the class that we wanted to use. So thanks for coming out and joining me here for talking about hover states and Material UI. If you've got any questions, leave them down below in the comments. And like I said, I'll link the other video series for Material UI components there. Thanks for coming out. Have a good one.